Welcome to Wisconsin in Focus. I'm J.D. Davidson. Later this summer, Republicans from across the country will converge on Milwaukee for the Republican National Convention. At any time, an influx of that many people into any of the nation's cities creates challenges. At a time when political divide seems that it's at an all-time high, those challenges can be increased. Many have already shouted concerns about security surrounding the convention. The most recent was Wisconsin U.S. Senator Ron Johnson. Joining us today is Ben Yount, Wisconsin contributor for the Center Square. Ben, what worries did Johnson outline, and what do officials think?
This comes down to what's being called the designated protest zone. And this is an idea that many conventions have, where you take a section of the city and you say, okay, you've got a First Amendment right to hold signs and to rally and to give speeches and to scream at the government if you like them, or scream at the government if you don't like them. And we're going to put all that activity here. The idea being that when you create a protest zone, then you limit protests throughout the rest of the city. And Milwaukee's convention is going to be held in what we lovingly call the Deer District. It's the area, the neighborhood, the section of the city based around Pfizer Forum, where the Milwaukee Bucks play. And there are hotels within walking distance, the convention centers within walking distance. There are bars, restaurants, and Pfizer is going to be the home, the hub of the convention. Everything you see on television is going to come from inside Pfizer. The protest zone in question is at Milwaukee's Père Marquette Park, which is about a quarter mile from the Deer District. Very, very close. And the concern that Ron Johnson, as well as Mitch McConnell, as well as local RNC planners have, is that's awful close. You're putting protesters within a shouting distance of the security perimeter, and Père Marquette Park is scrunched between two of the major thoroughfares that convention attendees who are staying outside the security zone, who aren't staying right there immediately next door to Pfizer, anybody who goes to the convention has to walk right past Père Marquette Park on one of two streets. And the fear is that those protesters can spill out, they can stop RNC attendees, RNC delegates, or every single day that someone wants to go to the convention, they're going to have to go by what is likely going to be a park full of people who are very, very angry and shouty. And, anybody who's ever seen a protest, when you let the protesters too close to the people who they are protesting, sometimes bad things happen. And so Johnson took his concerns to the Secret Service. The Secret Service listened, and it doesn't appear that the Secret Service is going to change any plans.
So we haven't talked much about the convention. I'm sure we will as we get closer to it. And you may not know, but who decides? Is it the Secret Service who decides where protesters will be for an event like this?
Yes. In the short answer, the Secret Service, because this is a presidential convention, they're the ones who are in charge of security. And we still don't know 100% what the security plan is. These things typically don't become known fully ever, but really the basics of the security plan aren't going to be known until just before the convention come July. But we have to remember that this is Milwaukee's second go at a convention. We were supposed to hold the Democrats in, the summer of 2020, but that got canceled, pushed remotely because of COVID. And most of the plan for the RNC is a carbon copy of the plan for the DNC from 2020. The difference is that you're talking about mostly Democratic, liberal, progressive protesters coming for the Republican convention. And, you always get protesters at the DNC. In fact, Chicago's got a whole different security plan. But this one, the fear, this is one of these ones where it becomes political, and then it becomes sure. Are the Democratic leaders of Milwaukee allowing protesters that close to the Republican National Convention on purpose? And Johnson talked a little bit about that earlier in the week when he was on the local conservative radio station. And he said, look, now the Secret Service is on record. These complaints have officially been lobbied. And if something, pray to God, bad goes wrong, which nobody wants, then it's a defeat of the Secret Service. You can't blame this on anyone because everyone from the local planners all the way up to the top Republican in the state have brought these concerns to say, hey, guys, could we move the protest zone back a little further? Can we put it in a different spot of the city? Can we have it not so close to these RNC attendees? And the Secret Service is going to be the one who ultimately makes that call. And if something goes wrong, Johnson says, look, we'll be able to go and say, here, did you do this on purpose? Was there any sort of political angle here? Or do you really just think that there's no security concern with having thousands and thousands of angry protesters get an opportunity to yell at hundreds and hundreds of RNC attendees each day of the convention?
I mean, obviously that's a difficult situation to be in. I mean, if you're a protester, you want to be in a place where the people or things you're protesting against can see your protest, but safety has to win out. What are local leaders saying about, I mean, obviously there's going to be a lot of people there for the convention, but I would guess a lot of the protesters will also be out-of-towners. What are they saying as far as the amount of people in the chaos that could be created in a small area of downtown Milwaukee?
This continues to be a situation of, well, it's up to the Secret Service to decide on the security plan. Or, well, we haven't finalized all of the security details yet. Or, well, we do have a First Amendment right that allows people to protest. There have been some rumblings from some of the protest groups about suing. They don't like the idea of a single protest zone. They would rather be able to protest throughout the city. Milwaukee has been very, very quiet since the summer of 2020. Don't forget, it was just down the interstate in Kenosha where we saw the violent protests of 2020 come to a head and really come to an end. It was after the Jacob Blake shooting, when he tried to run over some police officers with his kids in the car and an officer shot him in the back. That city was engulfed in violent protests that saw part of the city burn down, and you had the Kyle Rittenhouse shooting. That ended protests. And so Wisconsin, Milwaukee, up until we had these campus protests a couple of weeks ago, this has been a very, very quiet section. Now, to compare this to Chicago's security zone, Chicago's protest zone is 3.5 miles away from its convention. It is on the other side of downtown, and protesters there are angry. They want, as you said, to be closer to the people who they're protesting. Chicago also has not yet granted a single protest permit. And so it's really a balance, a measure between, all right, this is what Milwaukee is doing and this is what Chicago is doing. And, Chicago is being much less open to its protesters. Again, a Democratic city hosting the Democratic National Convention. But there's a whole other podcast episode where we get to talk about 1968 and 2024 and a hot August night in Chicago with a political convention and groups of angry college students. And there's a lot of expectation that maybe we'll see what we saw in 68, even though some of the specifics of that powder keg are different in Chicago this time around.
Sure, I have no doubt we'll talk more about the convention in the coming months. Ben, thanks for joining us today. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.
He ran for state office and was beaten. Started a business and failed. Ran for Congress and lost. But thankfully, Abraham Lincoln didn't give up. Persistence. Pass it on. From the Foundation for a Better Life at values.com.